there was a magic in his performance. His songs touched the heart of the young people out there and touched not only the heart, the head of the young people listening. He wasn't a great singer, but he was a great songwriter and a great projector of his songs. And he had become, between 62 and 63, an absolute iconic idol. You know, he was an icon. And Pete Seeger was still the king of the folk festival, but Dylan was the crown prince. Joan Baez was the crown princess. But Dylan had really taken over from the popularity point of view. And it was very exciting to see how he was part of the folk festival. He was the future of the folk festival. There's no question about it. And everybody was interested in what was Dylan's next song. And he was a genius at writing songs. And so this made 63 when the excitement of the finale, and we started filming the folk festival. Murray Lerner started the filming, and we had 3 years of Dylan singing, 63, 64, and 65. It was a folk utopia, because everybody worked for $50 a night, whether it was Johnny Cash or Pete Seeger or the Georgia Sea Island Singers or Spokes Marciani from South Africa. They got $50 plus expenses. Sometimes expenses were a couple $1,000. But that's what we did with our money. And all of this then became involved in the civil rights movement. And people like Stokely Carmichael and Snick and Core would come to the festival, and we would host them. And they were given housing, and they were given booths at the festival. And we became a political voice of civil rights. And it had tremendous appeal. And if you remember, the Boston March on Washington came out a little later. And all of these things were happening at Newport at the Folk Festival. And Dylan was, in effect, his songs became, times are changing. His songs became important and part of this movement. In 1964, the country changed. The Civil Rights Bill was passed. But Dylan didn't change. He was singing the same songs, the same excitement around him with the young people. His voice was, his songs were the songs of the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of his songs. And 64 did not change Dylan that much. His manager was making him more of a commercial figure, Albert Grossman, who was very involved with making big money. He had Peter, Paul, and Mary, and he would bring Dylan to the festival. And Peter, Paul, and Mary were very much a part of the festival. And Peter Yarrow and Mary particularly were workers. Peter was on the board. And so they were not just the talent and what was happening, the excitement. 63 carried over and reached, the apex was, I think, 64, not so much 63. So, no, Dylan did not change that much in 64.
Between 64 and 65, you had the rise of the Beatles, you had the beginning of the British invasion, you had rock and roll really becoming very prominent. And I know when we sat a month ago and talked, you talked about the folk community there.
Some people feel a disease hit the music world when the Beatles took over. Actually, it wasn't a disease. The Beatles were fantastic musicians who had reached out to a world that was waiting for something new. And it wasn't a reaction against the folk world. It was a reaction against the pop world. The Patti Pages, and they were the ones, and the Tin Pan Alley songs. All these wonderful songwriters couldn't get their songs published once the Beatles came out and with their own songs and the groups formed. But the folk world they resented the Beatles, not because of the music, because of the sound. They were acoustic. The folk world was an acoustic world. You stood up there with your banjo or your guitar, and you sang, and you could hear every word. There was no noise. People were quiet when they heard it. And there was a reaction, a major reaction against the Beatles. At the same time in the reaction, a greater percentage of the world was going with the Beatles. They had taken over. They came to America, could fill a ballpark, a ballpark, 30, 40,000 people would come to see the Beatles. This never happened to any music in the world. No entertainers ever did that, per se. And so we were putting on a festival. And we had done so many things. The blues was such a part of what we were doing. And we had all the great blues singers, Man Sliscom and Son House and John Hooker and name them. They were there. It was one of the great experiences for people to have heard them all at one time. And I think a lot of it was recorded, thank heavens. So that was one of the great contributions of the folk festival. But at the same time, what personified the difference was a fight between two people, Alan Lomax and Albert Grossman. Albert Grossman had a group, Paul Butterfield, and it was sort of a blues rock group. And Lomax gets up and says, well, they're not blues. Next thing you know is the fight between Grossman and Lomax, because Grossman, of course, says they are blues. Well, we won't go into the details of that. But that really exemplified what was going on in the world. That the electronic white kids singing the blues, singing rock and roll as opposed to Lomax, who was only interested in the originals. Where did it lead? We didn't know. Butterfield was rehearsing with Bob Dylan to accompany him at his performance. That's history now. Dylan went electric at Newport in 1965. People asked me what I was doing that night when they went electric. I had to go back and hold Pete Seeger's hand. He was in a car. He ran away to hide in an automobile, and somebody said, Pete's upset. I went back till he said, can you turn that sound down? I said, it's too late, Pete. Can't do it. The word came out afterwards, the rumors that Pete had an axe. He was going to cut that. That's all jive, had nothing to do with anything. And when we had some prisoners there from Texas that had axes that they were chopping logs and singing at the same time. And Pete might have said, if I had an axe. I don't remember that even. But I know he never did that. I can put that on I swear to that, because I know for sure. I had to literally go back to the car and sit with him. So I don't remember much else went on, except that I went back on stage. And when Dylan came up, because there were a lot of boos, the pro-rock world was trying to say there was more cheering than there were boos. No, there were more boos. There was some cheering. But I said to Bob, you have to go back and sing an acoustic song right on the stage. And he said, I don't have a guitar. I said, does anybody have a guitar for Dylan? Of course, 20 guitars went up in the air. And I think it was Petey Arrow that gave him his guitar. I'm not sure. And Dylan went back and sang It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And that was it. It was all over. And so you asked me my reaction. after, I didn't have that much of a reaction. It was just another concert to me. And what Dylan had done was exciting, it was fun. And the end of the concert, when Mel Lyman played the harmonica and Amazing Grace, while the people were filing out, was one of the most beautiful moments in the history of the folk festival. So there was still a beauty involved. But when I could feel it was the next year when we were asking artists to come to the festival. We could get plenty of artists, but there were still some artists that didn't feel coming to Newport was the greatest honor that could happen to them. And when we started selling tickets, we still had good crowds, but it just didn't boom. It didn't take off like that. And in the next 2 or 3 years, it just went down, down, down. And after 3 years from that, I guess it was 66, 67, 68, 69, 4 years, folk festival, the old great utopian folk festival was all over.